The ocean of Vilmora had no bottom that anyone had ever found. That was what the Varath said when the joint mission was first proposed. They said it with a kind of pride, the way a people speak about something old and untouched. The dark seas of Vilmora went down farther than their deepest probes had ever reached, and somewhere in that black water they believed there were ruins older than their own civilization. The humans said they would help look. That was how Cole Hardin ended up on the abyssal Accord, 300 m below the surface of an alien ocean, sitting at a navigation console with his dog lying at his feet. Rex was a shepherd, big and dark-coated, with a scar along his left ear from a training accident 3 years back. That he had been cleared for deep-sea operations after 6 months of pressure environment conditioning. The Varath crew had watched the whole process with visible confusion. They did not understand why a human navigator would bring an animal on a research mission. They had asked Dana Kelly, the team's systems engineer, to explain it. Dana had told them that Rex was a working animal trained to detect pressure changes, biological signals, and structural stress faster than most scanners on the ship. She had told them that Cole and Rex had worked together for 6 years and that their record in deep environment ops was better than any other team in the human fleet. The Varath had nodded and said nothing more, but they watched Rex with flat, cold eyes whenever he moved through the corridors. There was no warmth in how they looked at him, and only suspicion. Cole noticed, he always noticed, but Rex did not seem bothered, so Cole let it go. The mission had been going well for 11 days. The Accord was a long, narrow vessel built to take pressure that would crush most ships without effort. It carried 14 crew in total, 6 humans, 8 Varath. The Varath commander was a tall, angular being named Skethvar who spoke standard clearly and ran a disciplined operation. And GT, clear as throat. And GT, Cole had no complaints about him. The mission was clean. The data from the hydrothermal trench network they were mapping was producing results that made the science teams on both sides talk faster and louder with each passing day. Aaron Voss, the team medic, had started keeping a personal log just to track the discoveries, and he had told Cole over meal 2 days ago that this mission was going to change what both their species knew about the age of this ocean system. Cole had agreed and given Rex half his portion of bread, which Aaron pretended not to see. On the morning of the 12th day, everything broke. There was no warning of any kind. One moment the ship was moving steadily along a mapped vent corridor at 400 m depth, the next the ocean floor 3 km below them split along a line that had never appeared on any survey, and the pressure wave that came up from it hit the Accord the way a wall of water hit something small and breakable. The lights died. The emergency power kicked in half a second later and filled the corridors with dim red. Cole was thrown hard from his seat and hit the far wall with his shoulder inside. He went down. Rex was on his feet before Cole finished falling, standing low and alert over him, ears forward scanning the corridor. Alarms were going in every direction. Dana was already at her station, hands moving across the manual controls without wasted motion. Aaron pulled himself off the floor, the equipment bay with a cut above his eyebrow bleeding down the side of his face. The ship was sinking, not slowly. The pressure surge had taken out the primary drive and damaged 2 of the 4 stabilizer arrays. The Accord was going down at an angle that kept increasing. Cole got back to his console and pulled up the depth gauge. 420 m, 460, 510. Skethvar's voice came through the intercom, controlled and fast. Now he was directing his crew to emergency stations and running the Verath protocol. For catastrophic power loss, it was a solid protocol. Cole had read it during the mission briefing, but it was written for ships that were falling through charted water, not for what was happening now, which was a controlled descent becoming an uncontrolled one into ocean that no chart had ever touched. Cole started working on the drift vectors. Rex moved into the corridor. He did what he always did in uncertain environments. He walked the ship, reading the air, listening to the walls, checking for the things that no instrument caught the same way a trained dog did. Cole tracked him on the secondary camera feeds when he could spare a glance. Rex was calm. That was a good sign. It meant the structural situation had not yet crossed into the critical range. And then Rex stopped moving. He was in the junction corridor between the equipment bay and the Verath crew quarters. He had gone perfectly still in the way Cole knew well, not afraid, not aggressive, just completely focused on something that was not yet visible. He was crouched low with his ears forward and his eyes on the door of the Verath secondary bunk room. The door opened fast. Drenkolt came through it the way someone moves when they have just been thrown around in the dark and have not yet fully gotten their thinking back. He saw Rex in the red-lit corridor, and his whole body locked. Rex had not growled. Rex had not moved one step toward him. Rex was simply there doing his job, watching. Drenkolt reached for his sidearm. Cole saw it happening on the camera feed, and he was already out of his seat and moving when he heard the shot echo through the corridor walls. He was not fast enough. He came around the corner, and Rex was down on the floor of the corridor, and Cole crossed the distance and dropped beside him and put both hands on him. He knew within 2 seconds. He had spent 6 years reading every small movement and breath and muscle shift of this dog, and he knew it was already done. Drenkolt still had the weapon half raised. His eyes were wide. He said something in Verath and then tried Standard, saying that the animal had been coming at him. Cole looked up at him. He did not speak. He just looked. Drenkolt took 1 step back. Cole turned back to Rex. He put his hand flat on the dog's side and stayed there for a moment that felt much longer than it actually was. Hey, the alarms were still going. Ship was still sinking. The depth gauge on the wall panel read 4.1 km, 4.2. Cole stood up. He walked back to the navigation console. He sat down. He started working. Dana watched him from across the room and did not say anything. She had known Cole for 4 years, and she had never seen his face look the way it looked right now. It was completely still. It was quiet in a way that had weight behind it. The kind of quiet that is not calm. The kind that is something held down very tight. Aaron looked at Cole and then looked at Dana. Dana gave a small shake of her head. They both went back to their stations. The ship kept sinking into the dark. Outside the hull, the water was black and cold and went on without end in every direction. There was nothing down there that had ever seen light. There was nothing down there that had ever been mapped, and the Accord was going deeper into it with every passing minute, carrying 14 crew members, a grieving man at the helm, and no clear way back up. The depth gauge read 5.3 km. When Skethvar called the full crew to the main operations room, all 14 of them gathered in the red-lit space, the Varath on one side and the humans on the other, without anyone deciding it would be that way. It just happened. Skethvar stood at the center and gave a full status report in standard so both sides could follow. Primary drive was offline and would stay that way for at least 18 hours, even if they had full power to work with. Communications were dark, and the pressure at their current depth was above the rated tolerance of 2 of the ship's outer compartments. Hull integrity was sitting at 61% and would continue dropping as they went deeper. They were still going deeper. The standard Varath protocol for a situation like this was simple: conserve all power, reduce all non-essential systems to zero, hold position as best as possible, and wait for the surface recovery team to locate the ship and mount a rescue. Skethvar presented this plan clearly and without hesitation. It was a reasonable plan. It had worked before in emergencies that were less severe than this one. Cole listened to all of it without turning away from his console. When Skethvar finished, he looked at Cole and asked if the humans had anything to add. Cole pulled up a map on his screen. It was not a standard chart. It was something he had been building himself for the past 40 minutes using pressure data, temperature readings, and the analog instruments he carried as backup, because he had learned a long time ago not to trust digital systems to survive every kind of crisis. He pointed at a narrow corridor on the map that ran diagonally from their current depth up toward the 2 km mark. It was a thermal vent channel, a natural one formed by the activity in the trench below them. The water moving through it was warmer and less dense than the surrounding ocean. If the Accord could angle itself into that channel and use a short controlled engine burn to get moving, the thermal current would carry the ship upward without needing sustained drive power. One burn, enough to get into the channel, and then the ocean itself would do the rest. The problem was timing. The thermal channel shifted position every few hours based on the activity below. They had maybe a 90-minute window to make use of it before it moved somewhere they could not reach. Skethvar looked at the map for a long time, then he asked Cole how he had found the channel. Cole said he had been watching the temperature variance in the hull sensors and cross-referenced it with the pressure movement patterns from the last 6 hours. He said it the same way. He said everything right now, flat and quiet. His eyes on the screen. The Varath engineer beside Skethvar pulled up her own instruments and ran the check. After a moment, she said the readings matched. The channel was there. Skethvar said he would need time to consider. Then Cole said they had 83 minutes. There was a silence in the room. Dana had her arms crossed and was watching Skethvar with an expression that was patient on the surface and not at all patient underneath. Aaron was leaning against the wall. The door, his medic bag open beside him. The cut on his head sealed now with a strip of medical tape. The Varath crew stood very still in the way they always did when something had surprised them and they did not want to show it. Dren Cole stood at the back of the group. He had not spoken since the corridor. He had not looked directly at Cole since then either. He stood slightly apart from the other Varath, and if any of his crew noticed it, they said nothing. Skethvar agreed to Cole's plan. Cole nodded and went back to his console and kept working. The next hour was not loud. It was the kind of work that looked quiet from the outside and was anything but. Cole mapped the burn sequence down to 3-second intervals, accounting for the current drift, the angle they needed to hit the channel entrance, and the reduced output of an engine running on emergency reserves. Dana sat beside him and handled the power routing, moving energy from the non-critical systems in precise amounts to give the engines exactly what they needed and no more. Aaron moved through the ship and made sure every crew member was secured in a brace position for the burn. Human and Varath both. The Varath watched the humans work. They watched Cole most of all. Skethvar stood near the navigation console for most of that hour. He did not interfere, and he did not offer advice. At one point he said quietly, and not as a question, and that Cole was still working even now. After what had happened, Cole did not look up. He said yes. Skethvar was quiet for a moment, then he said he wanted to understand that. Cole said there was not much to understand. The crew needed to get out. He knew how to get them out, so he was doing it. Skethvar said that among his people, when a significant loss occurred, the expected response was withdrawal, rest, time to process. Cole said that among his people, when there was work to do, you did the work. The rest came after. Skethvar said nothing more. He kept watching. There was one problem that Cole had not raised in the group briefing because there was no point raising it until he had thought it through. The thermal channel entry required a precise angle, but getting to that angle required the lateral thrust system on the port side of the hull to be at full function. It was not. The seismic surge had damaged the coupling on the port lateral thruster. It was sitting at 40% output, which was not enough for the angle they needed. Cole had been thinking about this since he found the channel. There was one way to fix the coupling. It required someone to go outside the hull and do the repair manually. The tools for it were on the ship. The repair itself was not complicated. The problem was the depth. The deep pressure suit in the equipment bay was rated to 4.5 km. They were at 5.3. Cole had already looked at the suit. He had already thought about what modifications he could make to the bracing and the seal reinforcement with the materials they had available. He had not told Dana yet. He had not told Aaron. He finished the burn sequence, saved it to Dana's console, and then stood up and walked to the equipment bay. Dana followed him 2 minutes later. She stood in the doorway and looked at the suit laid out on the floor and looked at Cole and said his name once. He told her what he needed from her in terms of the modifications. He told her what materials to use and how to apply them. He told her the sequence of the repair once he was outside. Dana looked at him for a long time. Then she picked up the tools and started working on the suit without another word. Outside the hull, the dark water pressed against the ship from every direction, cold and heavy and without end. It had been down there for longer than anyone on that ship could measure. It had never cared about anything that moved through it. It did not care now. But Cole was going into it anyway. The Verath engineer whose name translated roughly as Set looked at the suit. Modifications Dana had made and said very plainly that they were not enough. Dana said she knew that. Set said the suit would begin to fail at 4.8 km. They were at 5.3. The structural difference between those two numbers at this depth was not small. It was the kind of difference that ended things. Dana said she knew that too. Set looked at Cole, who was already stepping into the lower half of the suit, and said that the human navigator understood this. Cole said yes. Set stood there for a moment. Then she picked up one of the remaining pieces of hull patch material from the equipment shelf, looked at it, and told Dana there was one more reinforcement they could add to the left shoulder joint. She said it would not fix the depth problem, but it would buy a small amount of additional time before the seal degraded. Dana moved aside and let her work. Cole did not say anything. He waited while the two of them finished the modifications together. When they were done, he put the helmet on and ran the suit check. Everything that was still functional showed green. The things that were not functional he already knew about. Dana handed him the repair kit through the airlock door. She held the handle a moment longer than she needed to before she let go. She said his name. He looked at her through the visor. She said to come back. He said he would. The airlock cycled and the outer door opened and Cole stepped out into the ocean of Velmora. The darkness was total. He had been in dark water before. He had done open ocean work in systems with no nearby stars and low ambient light. He had trained in blackout conditions at depth in human oceans. He thought he knew what dark water felt like. He had not known anything. This was different. This was the dark that existed at the bottom of a world that had been building its own weight for billions of years, without anyone looking into it. The hull lights of the Accord reached maybe 4 m in any direction before the water simply swallowed. Not black in the way a room is black when the lights go out. Something thicker than that. Something that felt like it had mass. Cole moved along the hull using the handholds and kept his breathing steady. The pressure was the first thing. It was not like the pressure he had felt in shallower water. It pressed on the suit from every side with a uniformity that was almost calm. The way something very large and very certain of itself does not need to rush. The modified shoulder joint held. The left knee seal held. The readings inside the helmet stayed. Range. He moved hand over hand toward the port. Lateral thruster housing. It took 11 minutes to reach it. 11 minutes of moving in total darkness along a hull that was groaning faintly under its own stress in water that should not have had anything living in it, but that felt in a way Cole could not explain and did not try to. Aware. Not hostile. Not friendly, just aware in the way that very old things sometimes are. He reached the thruster coupling and ran his light over it. The damage was clean, which was the one good thing. The surge had snapped the secondary lock bracket and pushed the main coupling arm about 12 degrees out of alignment. It had not cracked the housing. It had not damaged the internal mechanics. It just needed to be realigned and locked back in place on the surface in a dry bay with full lighting and a functioning tool. Said it was a 20-minute job at 5.3 km depth in water that was doing things to the suit that the suit was not designed for hanging off the side of a ship with nothing below him for kilometers and Nothing above him but more dark water. Cole gave himself 40 minutes. He started the repair inside the ship, and Dana had put the repair sequence on the main screen so the whole crew could follow the progress. On the external camera feed, the image was poor. The hull lights gave enough to see Cole's silhouette and the faint movement of his hands, but not much more. The Verith crew watched the screen. Scathvar stood with his hands behind his back and did not speak. Set stood beside him and occasionally said something in Verith that no one translated for the humans. Aaron sat on a crate with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the screen, and did not move. Dren Cole stood at the back again. He watched the screen with a different kind of attention than the others. The others watched it the way you watch something difficult and uncertain. Dren Cole watched it the way you watch something you are trying to understand and cannot quite reach. The suit held the pressure readings inside Cole's helmet stayed in the red warning range, but did not cross into critical. The modified shoulder joint made small sounds that he felt more than heard. Settling sounds, material being asked to do something it was not built for and doing it anyway through sheer resistance. The temperature inside the suit dropped 2 degrees below what it should have been, which meant the secondary insulation layer on the right side was losing integrity. He noted it and kept working. He got the coupling arm back to alignment at the 31-minute mark. The lock bracket was harder. The snap had left one of the anchor points deformed, and the replacement bracket from the repair kit needed to be forced into position manually, which at this depth, with gloves on, was a slow, careful, grinding process. He worked at it without rushing. Rushing at depth was how you made mistakes. Mistakes at depth were how you did not come back. He got the bracket seated at the 57-minute mark. He ran the function test from the panel on the hull. The coupling moved. It moved fully and cleanly through its whole range without catching. The readout on the panel showed green. Cole pressed his helmet lightly against the hull of the ship for a moment, just for a moment. Then he started the hand-over-hand journey back along the hull toward the airlock. Inside the ship, Dana let out a long breath. Set made a short sound beside Scathvar. Aaron dropped his head and put his hands over his face for about 3 seconds before he straightened up again. Scathvar said nothing. He kept looking at the screen, at the figure moving along the dark hull, in the dark water, slow and steady and coming back. He said something in Verith. It was quiet, and it was not meant for the room. Set, standing beside him, heard it. She did not translate it for anyone. What Scathvar had said was that he had commanded 6 crews across 4 decades of deep environment work, and he had never seen anything like what was on that screen. He had not said it with fear. He had said it with something that did not have a direct translation into standard. The closest any of his crew would have attempted was something like the kind of respect that surprises you because you did not know you were capable of feeling it for something so unlike yourself. Cole reached the airlock, the outer door. Cycled, he stepped inside, and the inner door opened, and Dana was there, and she grabbed the front of the suit with both hands and did not say anything for a moment. Cole took the helmet off. His face was wet with condensation, and the look on it had not changed since the corridor. It was still still. It was still quiet. It was still holding something down very Tight. He handed Dana the helmet. He walked to the navigation console. He sat down. He started running the burn sequencer. They had 16 minutes before the thermal channel moved. Cole called the burn for 12 minutes out. He told every crew member to get to a brace position. He told them what to brace against and how to hold it. The Verith crew did as he said without discussion. Scathvar had told them to follow Cole's lead on the ascent sequence, and that was what they did. Then Dana took the power routing station. She had the burn mapped in segments on her screen, each one color-coded, each one tied to a specific output level from a specific system. She had borrowed power from the environmental controls, the secondary comms array, the galley systems, and 4 other places to build up what the engines needed for the initial burn without blowing the emergency reserves entirely. Aaron made one last pass through the ship to make sure everyone was secured. He stopped at the equipment bay on his way back to his station. Rex was still there, on the floor of the corridor. Aaron had moved him to the equipment bay earlier, out of the corridor, with no fuss and no announcement. He had done it quietly while Cole was outside. He had folded Rex's front legs the way you fold something you are taking care of, not just moving. But he stood there for 2 seconds. Then he went back to his station. Cole watched the clock. At 3 minutes out, he began feeding the corrected angle data to the engines. The damaged thruster coupling held at full output, which was what the work outside had been. For the port side responded cleanly. The ship began to shift its angle by fractions of a degree, moving to meet the channel entry point at 1 minute out. Scathvar came to stand behind Cole's station. He did not touch anything. He just stood there. Cole did not ask him to move. At 30 seconds, Cole told Dana to hold the power levels exactly where they were. Dana said she had them. At 10 seconds, Cole told everyone to hold on to something, and then he ran the burn. The engines fired, and the Accord lurched forward and upward at an angle that felt wrong for a ship of its size, and immediately felt right in the way a river feels right when you stop fighting it and let it take you. The thermal channel grabbed the ship. The warmer, lighter water pushed up through the hull temperature sensors, and the depth gauge started moving in a direction it had not moved in hours. Up. It went slowly at first, then faster as they found the center of the channel. The ship shuddered and groaned, and one of the secondary hull alarm panels went off, and Dana killed it without looking up because the reading was in the tolerable range and she was busy. The Verith crew gripped their holds and stayed quiet. Aaron had both hands wrapped around a wall bracket and his eyes closed. 5.1 km, 4.8 of 4.4. Cole watched the depth gauge and watched the angle and made small corrections. Every 30 seconds, tiny adjustments to keep the ship centered in the channel as it shifted and moved with the thermal activity below. 3.7 km. 3.2. The hull groaned, not in the way it had been groaning since the seismic event, the ongoing low-level complaint of a vessel under stress. This was different. This was a single sharp sound from the aft section of the ship, the kind of sound that means something has given way. The aft compartment alarm went off. Immediately, Dana pulled up the reading and said it in a flat voice. The aft port seam had split. Water was entering. The 2 Verith crew members who were stationed in the aft compartment, needed. To get out, Scathvar was already moving. Cole was faster. He was out of his seat before Scathvar had taken a full step, and he was running through the corridor toward the aft section before anyone had a chance to organize a response. The corridor was tilted from the ascent angle, and the red emergency lighting made the walls look like the inside of something alive. He could hear water. He hit the aft compartment hatch and pulled it open, and the water level inside was already at knee height and rising fast. The two Verath crew members were there. One already moving toward the hatch, the other one caught with his leg jammed against a shifted equipment shelf that had slid in the lurch of the burn. Cole got the free one out first, grabbed him by the arm and pushed him through the hatch into the corridor. The second one he had to go in for. The water was at his thighs. He crossed the room and got his hands under the equipment shelf and pulled. The shelf had 200 kg of mass behind it, but the angle of the tilt was partially in Cole's favor, and he got it to shift enough for the Verath crew member to pull his leg free. Cole grabbed his arm and they went for the hatch together. The water was at Cole's waist by the time he got through. He pulled the hatch closed behind him and hit the manual seal with the heel of his hand and spun the lock. The sound of rushing water dropped to a muffled push against the door. He stood in the corridor with water soaking his clothes to the waist and breathing hard for the first time. He looked at who he had pulled out. It was Dren Cole. Dren Cole was on the corridor floor coughing water out, his leg bent at an angle that was going to need Aaron's attention. He looked up at Cole from the floor. They looked at each other. Cole held the look for 2 seconds, then he turned and walked back toward the bridge. He got back to his console. He sat down. He looked at the depth gauge, 2.1 km. He made 2 small corrections and settled the ship back into the center of the channel. Scathvar stood at the entrance to the bridge looking at Cole. Aaron passed him in the corridor, moving at a fast walk toward the aft section with his medic bag. Scathvar stopped him briefly and asked who was in the aft compartment. Aaron told him. Scathvar was quiet for a moment. He looked at the back of Cole's head at the navigation console. Then he stepped aside and let Aaron pass. Dana was watching Cole from her station, and she had watched him run the burn sequence and hold the ship in the channel and then leave his post and come back with his clothes soaked to the waist. She had seen who he had carried out. She did not say anything. There were things that did not need words, and this was one of them. 1.4 km. The whole temperature sensors were showing warmer water on all sides now. They were out of the deep zone. Pressure on the hull was dropping into ranges that the ship could manage. Without protest, the depth gauge read 900 m, then 600, then 300. The thermal channel curved upward and the ship followed it, rising through layers of ocean that got lighter by increments so small you would not notice them if you were not looking. Cole noticed them and he watched the dark outside. The whole cameras turned from absolute black to dark gray to the deep blue-gray of water that had some light in it. At 120 m, Cole eased the ship out of the channel and leveled the ascent. At 60 m, he told Dana to bring the communications array back online. Dana brought it up. The response from the surface came in 11 seconds. A Verath recovery vessel had been holding position above their last known location. For the past 9 hours, they had a signal now. They were coming. Dana put her face in her hands. She stayed that way for about 4 seconds. Then she sat up straight and started coordinating the surface contact. Cole sat at his console and watched the ocean. Outside, the cameras get lighter and lighter. It was gray at the surface. It was the color of early morning or late afternoon, the kind of light that does not commit to anything. When the hull of the Accord broke through the surface and the cameras caught open sky for the first time, the whole bridge went quiet. The Vareth crew made a sound Cole had not heard from them before. It was low and collective, and he did not know what it meant in their language. But he recognized what it was. Relief. He sat in his chair and looked at the gray sky through the camera feed and said nothing. Outside the hull, the ocean moved the way oceans move, indifferently, completely, without any awareness of what had just passed through it. Cole closed his eyes. He kept them closed for a long time. The Vareth recovery vessel was called the Stenvar, which translated roughly as steady light, and it was there when the Accord surfaced, sitting about 200 m off the port side, broad and solid in the gray water. The rescue teams came across in pressurized tenders, 6 of them moving fast. The Accord was listing slightly to the port side from the aft compartment, flooding, and the hull was marked in a dozen places from the events of the last 12 hours, but it was floating and it was intact. All 14 crew were alive. The medics came on board first. They went through the ship systematically, checking everyone. Aaron worked alongside them on the human side. He had already set Dren Colt's leg in a temporary brace in the corridor. Dren Colt had not spoken during the process. He had stayed still while Aaron worked and watched the ceiling of the corridor and said nothing. When the medic team was finished and the debriefers came, they set up in the Accord's main operations room and went through the crew one at a time. They had the standard forms for a catastrophic incident: the pressure event, the power loss, the depth breach, the ascent. All of that was straightforward. It was the other parts of the report that took longer. Skethvar gave his account. First, he spoke for a long time. Debriefers interrupted him twice to ask for clarification, and he corrected himself once where he felt he had underestimated a figure. When he was done, he sat back and looked at the wall and appeared to be thinking about something that had no easy end. Dana gave her account. She was precise and did not add anything that was not a fact, and when the debriefers asked her to characterize Cole's performance during the incident, she said she would prefer to just give them the data and let them characterize it themselves. They looked at the data. They did not ask for a characterization. After that, Cole's account took the least time of anyone's. He gave them the sequence: the thermal channel, the burn, the coupling, repair, the aft breach. He gave them the timestamps and the technical data from memory with no errors that any subsequent log check found. When they asked him about the aft compartment, he said the hatch seal had failed and he had extracted the 2 crew members who were in the compartment. The debriefer asked if he had known which crew members were in the aft compartment before he ran back there. Cole said no. The debriefer looked at his notes, and he asked no further questions on that point. After the formal debrief, the recovery crews transferred everyone to the Stenvar for the journey to the Nearest surface station. The Accord was to be towed in separately. For structural assessment, Cole was the last person to leave the Accord. He stopped in the equipment bay before he crossed to the tender. Aaron had wrapped Rex in a section of thermal blanket from the emergency supply. He had done it cleanly and with care. Cole stood in the equipment bay for a while. Then he picked Rex up and carried him across to the tender himself. The surface station was a Verath installation, a wide low structure on a natural rock shelf above the tide line. On one of Vilmer's smaller island formations, it had medical facilities, communication arrays, and quarters for transient crews. But the humans were given a section of the crew quarters and left to settle in. That evening, Dren Colt sent a request through the station's communication system asking if Cole would agree to a meeting. Cole agreed. They met in one of the small rooms off the main corridor, a plain space with 2 chairs and a low table. Dren Colt came in on a walking support. His leg braced and lowered himself into one of the chairs. Cole sat across from him. No one has recorded what was said in that room. No one was present for it. When Cole came out 40 minutes later, his expression was the same as it had been since the corridor on the Accord, still quiet, holding something down. Dren Colt came out a few minutes after Cole. He walked slowly on his support to the end of the corridor and stopped and stood looking at the wall. And one of the junior Verath crew members passed him and started to speak to him and then stopped and walked away. Dren Colt stood there for a long time. The next morning, the Verath Command Authority sent a formal communication to the Joint Mission Oversight Committee, requesting that the full record of the Accord incident be distributed to both the Verath High Command and the Human Fleet's Operations Review Board. The request used language that the Oversight Committee noted was unusual in its directness. Verath formal communications did not typically make requests in language that simple. The record was distributed. The response from the Human Fleet's senior command to the Verath High Command was brief, and it said that Cole Hardin's actions were consistent with the conduct expected of a human deep navigation specialist operating under adverse conditions. This response was read by several senior Verath officers who then had a series of internal discussions that no human was present for. The contents of those discussions were never made fully available, but one of the officers involved was later asked by a junior colleague what she had taken from the whole affair. She said she had spent her career believing she understood what humans were. She said she had thought they were capable and adaptable and occasionally impressive in the way that most spacefaring species were occasionally impressive. She said the Accord incident had not shown her something new about what humans could do. It had shown her something new about what humans did not stop doing even when the best reason they had ever had to stop was taken from them. The junior colleague asked what she meant. She said she meant that any species could fight when it was angry. Any species could perform under pressure when the pressure was external. What she had not expected was a being that took the worst thing that could be done to it and converted it not into rage, not into the kind of strength that breaks things, but into the kind that carries things across. She said she did not know what to do with that information. She said she suspected it was something the Verath would be thinking about for a long time. On the third day at the surface station, Duck Cole asked one of the Verath station staff if there was a place on the island where the ground was good for digging. The staff member, a young Verath who had been assigned to assist the human crew during their stay, did not immediately understand the question. Dana, who was standing nearby, quietly explained. The staff member was quiet for a moment. Then he said, yes. He said there was a stretch of ground on the eastern side of the island above the waterline, sheltered from the wind, where the earth was soft and the grass, what passed for grass on Vilemora, grew thick and dark green. He said it had a view of the open water. He offered to show Cole where it was. Cole said thank you. They went together that afternoon, Cole and the young Verath staff member and Dana, who brought a flat piece of stone she had found on the shore. They did not take long. The Verath staff member stood back a respectful distance while Cole worked and said nothing. Dana set the stone when Cole was done, flat and level, and stepped back. Cole stood there. The water was visible from where they stood, wide and gray-green under the afternoon light. Nothing like the black water 5 km down. It looked like an ordinary ocean from up here. It looked like something that held the light instead of swallowing it. Cole stood for a while behind him, at a distance that was close enough to be present but far enough to be respectful. 2 figures stood. Dana, who had not moved, and someone else. Dran Colt had come on his own. He had not been asked. He did not come forward. And he stood with his walking support and looked at the flat stone in the ground and at Cole standing in front of it and at the ocean beyond. He did not speak. Cole did not turn around. But he knew Dran Colt was there, and he let him stay. The wind came off the water and moved through the dark green grass, and the 4 of them stood there on the edge of an alien ocean that went down to places no one would ever fully map, and the afternoon light held for a while longer before it finally let go.